Welcome to the Courage to Be podcast with Tanya Vasallo. Before we get into this episode, I want to share with you that I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in the podcasting world so that more and more women's voices are heard. If you feel that this is something you value too, then please rate, review, and share the podcast. And in exchange, and as my way to say thank you to you, I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful conversations to transform your life and your business. And we are back with Kassi Wilson. And this particular episode is about mentorship and a masterclass of how she got into self-publishing. We have listened to the previous episode with her poems, but we'll get more in depth into the nitty-gritty of the process of it. So welcome, Kassi.
Thanks for having me today. I'm happy to be here.
I know, I'm excited for this particular episode of it was so beautiful listening to your poems, hearing your story and the other episodes. So if you have not listened to the other episode, you have to go listen to it before you even get into this one, because you'll understand the background of what she's explaining and her process. And it was just so beautiful listening to you read the poems and explain your process with it and how you started overcoming your own fears to be able to expose and share your poems with the world versus keeping them to yourself. But I want to go deeper in this particular episode of the journey of becoming self-published, because I know there has to be someone that's listening that either loves writing poems, loves writing in general. Maybe they want to write a memoir. Maybe they want to write a kid's book, but they've blocked themselves. Like, oh, unless I get a publisher, I can't get this work out into the world. And I want you to share with us kind of like dispel a little bit that myth that it has to be a certain way, or to stop yourself from realizing a dream that could benefit many people. You know, even if it were just a memoir and you want to give it to your family members or something, you know, like you want to record something, or a children's book, like my husband's self-published several children's books that we've had for our daughter. But anyway, I want to hear it from your perspective, Kassi, of just what was that process for you? What were the fears that started showing up for you?
Yeah, so I have been writing for a long time. I knew eventually I'd want to publish and be an author, because I think every writer has a dream of being an author. They don't want to just stop at writing and not share their work. The end goal is to eventually share your work. But what can happen along the way is that we can get bogged down with the logistics and the technicality of it. And how do I even do this if I don't know how to? And all the questions that start coming in and the uncertainties of it can keep us from even getting started. And so that's part of what I want to talk about today with getting started. And so for me, it was pushing through as a writer, and then because you get to a point where you have to break through into being an author. And there are many ways to do that. And commonly it's been through traditionally publishing your book and getting an agent and writing query letters and all those parts of it. And I decided, instead of doing traditional publishing, to try the self-publishing route. And I've written 2 poetry books that I've self-published in the last year and a half. And I've been so happy I've done it. And I'd love to share some of my wisdom with listeners today.
I love that. Yes, please do so, because like I said, I think there's many of us that we're our own barriers. We stop ourselves because, like what you said, the uncertainty, the not knowing how, we don't have enough knowledge on how to do this. So please walk us through how you did it and how you overcame those fears. How did you decide to, you know what? Even if I don't have a like a publishing company, I'm going to do it myself. And how do you go about that?
Yeah, Yeah, I think part of what can help is learning knowledge, learning the knowledge, getting the knowledge so that can alleviate some of the anxiety. But what I would say is that if you're just starting out writing, I would focus on the writing and the craft and the art and the inspiration and the thing that you want to make. I would focus on that and initially, and not let yourself get too bogged down with the how do I make this book and how do I publish it and how do I market it? Because that is totally working on a different side of your brain. But then it comes to a point where you do want to switch to that side of your brain because you want to think about the practicality of it. And so that does come into play. So I would just say if you are starting out just writing a book, whether it's poetry, a memoir, a sci-fi novel, I would get the creative juices flowing and start working on that. And then I would say maybe halfway through the process of that, then start looking into the self-publishing. And I can share more about that part of it. But do you happen to have like any follow-up questions with that, with what I just said?
No, that's a great tip that instead of getting ahead of ourselves, focus on the writing first, have a certain amount of something written. What would you say is a good amount before you might want to start? Is it a quantity or is it a feeling that you have to reach? Like, oh, I feel like I'm feeling more confident with this and I'm getting more, or is it you have to have a certain amount of words or of poems in your case? Like what do you recommend with that?
Yeah, I would say that I think you want to know if you have an idea or something that you can bring to life. So it's like if you want to write, like let's say you have a memoir story or a personal story that's really on your heart that you want to write. I would say get that going and work on the discipline of getting down to write because that discipline of writing will pay off with the other parts of the publishing process. So because you're now turning yourself into a self learner. So it's like I looked up so many things on Google like through this process. So it's like as I was, working on my poems, like I did a lot of the editing myself. So like I did not hire an editor for my poetry book. I did a lot of the editing and I'd Google things like, how do you say this? Does this need an apostrophe? And so it's amazing how Google can actually help you edit your stuff because it'll show you the right ways to say things, the wrong ways to say things. If there's like cliche words, you want to stick away from those words. And then I had a few friends who know poetry really well or just who know the English language pretty well, just read it through to just as an extra pair of eyes to see if they caught any. So I had a few people do that. I had a few beta readers where once my draft was really close to being done, I had a few people, just about 5 people, read it from front to back and they flagged anything that didn't look right. And so then I could go back. So it's like I had my creative writer hat on for like most of the writing process. And then I switched hats to the editor eyes where you really try to look at it from a reader's viewpoint or editor slash reader's viewpoint and see like, what's going to work here, what's not. And then it becomes so it's like by the very end, you're throwing poems out or you're putting new poems in because you overall want the collection to be very cohesive and flow from beginning to end. So it's like you're really bringing an art form to life. It's not just about the individual poems, it's about the whole collection and how it comes across as a whole.
I was going to ask you about when you said that you shared with other friends that were poets or that were well, versed in this material, like in just in writing and stuff. At what point, like, would you recommend sharing with friends and family or no? Or at what point, are you ready to share your baby with the world?
Yeah, I think you want it mostly probably 80% finished before you share it with anybody. Because there was a few people, like I shared it with a few people that I was like, just help me with like some of these lines that I'm stuck on, or this grammar thing I'm stuck on. But then when I like shared it with my husband, I wanted it to be like almost there because like I wanted him to see more of the finished product. So, but I would even like if you have friends that you could share it with, I recommend sharing it with them, but not everybody does. So then I would say like, you know, there's so many resources for finding an editor. And most of the time, like people would recommend you need an editor to look at your work, or a copyright person, or not, a copy editor, you know, to look at it, especially for things like novels or like a self-help book. But I think poetry is a little different because the author really has an eye for how they want the poems to flow. So we don't want an editor to come in and really change a lot of things because there's so much artistic form in how it's already being delivered. So I think for poetry, definitely get, you know, have a few people read it and, you know, flag anything that comes across that doesn't look right. But then use Google and then I'd say, but if you're doing a memoir, self-help book, a business book, or any kind of like, you know, story driven book, I would definitely hire an editor for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it sounds like you were quite good of just like intuitively saying, okay, this stays, this leaves, you know, and I don't think everyone, it's a hard process because I've been through that from a
Mhm.
photography perspective. Like we had to work on a photo book project in Spain and it was 2 years. So we had thousands and thousands of photos. And at the end of the book project, and I still feel like we left too many photos in there, we'd put them all up on the wall. I mean, we had hundreds of photos and we'd start the same thing, pull down. This one doesn't go with this one. And I worked on it with my husband. So it was a little bit easier of just like having four sets of eyes of just like, why would you pull that one down? Oh, okay, that makes sense. No, you know what? I kind of think it would still work there. So I think it's great, like you're suggesting that if it's a more in-depth type of memoir or a story of some sort, to maybe lean in with an editor of some sort that can help you out and cipher it,
Yeah,
especially if you're not like Kassi, where you can be like, yep, this goes and it's good and it's fine. Like,
yeah.
don't check yourself out here, you know, like just
So
find someone that's an editor and go
I,
down the road.
yeah, even though I did it this way where I didn't get an editor, I highly recommend people to get editors for their work. I just think somehow I had a way of doing this where I didn't feel like I needed an editor. And I used my money for different resources, like a book cover designer and an interior designer. And that's part of the process you'll need to figure out is like, how much, you know, of a budget do you have for this? And then figuring out the professionals that you're going to need to help you bring your book to life is also a part of the process. And I'm going to just kind of do a side note before I get into that part of it. But I think getting knowledgeable about the kind of books that are out there is going to help you as a writer and an author it'll give you an advantage for how you want your book to look in the market. So if you think about like novels, the book covers and the way the book looks is going to be different from a poetry book. It's going to be different from a business book. It's going to be different from a sci-fi novel. Or a mystery novel. Every genre has their own kind of almost like expressive way that they show that this is the sci-fi novel or this is a mystery novel. And so what I did with poetry books is I would go into like libraries or bookstores and I would just like, you know, look through all the bookshelves and I would start like opening up the books and looking at them from like inside out to really see like what do these books have, you know, and then you start tangibly being able to visualize your own book. And you know, some of the inspirations I got was like Mary Oliver's books, that these like paperback books that she has on the market, and the trim size is 5 by 8 and so, or 5 by 9, and the trim size means it's just the measurements of your book from top to bottom and the width. So every book has a trim size. Business books kind of have bigger trim sizes. Novels kind of are typically bigger than poetry books, although some poetry books can vary in size depending on how big and how long the poems are. So it also depends on the size of poems that you have within the book that will help you decide which trim size you need to end up picking for your book. But so that's another thing. And then you also can find out how much are poetry books, because poetry books are typically a different price from like novels. So, because like as a self-publisher, you're going to end up picking the price of your book. You're going to end up buying the book's ISBN number. And if you like, an ISBN number is basically the book's number that tells everybody, okay, this book title goes with this book number. And it's just basically, it goes in the database and it's a part of the metadata of your book. It's how retailers identify your book. So every book has its own unique ISBN number.
It's like the barcode, right? At the back, like they have the little barcode on the back of it.
Yeah, it's right at the back. You'll see it on if you flip your book, any book around, you'll see it on the back of the book.
That's awesome. Let's take a quick pause and we'll come back to this. Hi there, I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcast, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. You can also find other free goodies in the show notes. Go check them out. Thank you for these explanations, Kassi. What I'm taking away from this first portion that you were talking about, like definitely have a budget together of like who you're going to hire, because maybe, like you said, you might not need an editor because you're good at self-editing, but you want to hire an illustrator, for the book cover, or designer, or maybe you want to hire a coach, or you're wanting to do, like whatever it is, like look at your numbers. I think that's a great suggestion, as well as paying attention to what it is that you think you might be good at versus handing it out to someone else, like farming it out and getting the help and the support. What would you say to the person that's in the process of it, so that they can come and listen to this episode again when they're wanting to just give up? Like they just woke up, they've been working on it for months, and it's like, ugh, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Should I even continue? Because I'm sure those days were there, right?
Yeah, they are. They are. I think that, man, I wish I knew. I think I know what I could say. It's just, you have to have belief in yourself in this process, especially because when I went through this process, it ended up being really self-empowering, because I didn't go the traditional route and I didn't, do the whole traditional publishing with my books. And so you extra have to believe in yourself because you don't have a publisher backing you. But what's also nice about that is that you don't have the pressure of a publisher backing you, so that, if your sales don't do that great, you're not going to affect anybody else. Like there's not a lot of like external pressure. And so I think that's the beauty of self-publishing, is it really opens doors for people who want to write, publish, be an author, and get their foot in the door. And part of it for me was like, I wanted to start sharing my work and getting my work out there so I could connect with the readers and with an audience and build upon that over time. I didn't have the goal going into it that I'm going to sell a ton of books and be like a best-selling author. It was more about, let me just get from behind the scenes here and move into the light a little bit more. And then as you do that, your confidence starts showing up for you. Your courage starts showing up. And that's how my answer to that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And so going back, if you look back, who were you before publishing the book, and who are you now? How are you different from the Kassi from 2 years ago or a year and a half ago before the first one went out?
I think I struggled with self-doubt, and I kind of always have my whole life, where I'm second guessing myself. I can kind of hesitate I'm not always an action oriented person. I can be more of an observer and a processor before I take a move. But then when that happens, you can stay in the same spot for too long. And what's really helped me is as I take more action, I really feel the momentum coming in stronger and stronger. And so I feel like I'm seeing a more clear and true representation of who I actually am now than who I was, 3, 4, 5 years ago, who was really still stuck and almost dealing with a little depression because I felt like I didn't know, like I wanted to do art and I wanted to create, but felt so frustrated in that place of like stuckness, if you want to call it that.
Do you feel like you've gotten more confident, more bold? Like what would be some adjectives or words that you would use to describe the new Kassi here?
I would say stronger. I think there's a strength that's come and a grit that is there. And it's this desire to see what I'm made of now. Cause it's like, okay, now I did this. Like, I want to see what I can do next. And the interesting thing about this too is as I was starting to write my poetry books and publish, I started running half marathons and I did a few marathons and I was training with a training group and just showing up for my runs and everything throughout this whole process. But I feel like those two things really went hand in hand because it's that mind, body, spirit connection that really comes into play where your body needs movement, your mind and your creativity needs movement to give it its power, give it its power, its momentum. And I remember doing my very first, or this was my second half marathon, and I got my best time. So I got like a personal record. And I remember like halfway through the race, just feeling this like fire inside that just felt like it lit up and it helped me finish the rest of the race. But I will never forget how that fire felt inside. And I actually feel like that is my connection to my creativity. It's my connection to it's a creative fire and force inside, and it directs, you know, everything that I want to do in life.
Wow, that's so powerful. And just the parallel of doing the physicality of training for a marathon too, the same as this one. And wasn't one of the marathons that you ran like in the middle of like a thunderstorm or something and you were all wet? Like, tell us a bit
Yeah,
about that because that's also a metaphor for the journey that you might go in. There might be obstacle after obstacle, and how are you going to be persistent and ride it
yeah.
out?
Yeah, so this marathon happened in Cincinnati by where I live, and there was a lightning storm the entire morning. So we show up to race, and they decide that we're still going to do the marathon. And about 2 miles into it, it started thundering, lightning, and then it started just downpouring. And so, like, there was puddles by like mile 5, 6. People are running through puddles, and my shoes were waterlogged the rest of the time. So I ran like, I think a marathon's about 26.2 miles, but I ran like 22 miles with fully wet shoes and with extra weight on me that way. And that's where it's like once I started, I had to finish. It's like nothing was going to stop me from finishing. And I think that's kind of what has happened with these two books is there certainly was like obstacles being thrown my way, like left and right with both of them for different reasons. And once I started it, I had to finish. And I think that's part of the power with starting something is that you're going to be more inclined to wanting to finish it had you just not started.
That's great. What are some resources that you think are a must that you wish someone would have shared with you when you were
Yeah.
getting started?
Yeah. So there's one primary resource that I actually did know about from like years before I even started trying to publish these books. So it came back into my memory when I was working on these, but it's called Ingram Spark. Ingram Spark, it is a self-publishing book company, print and distribution platform. And so what Ingram Spark does is they offer writers and indie authors the ability to create professional print books, paperbacks, hardcovers, and ebooks. And what's nice about them is they have a global distribution network. So if you publish with them, you can have your books sold on Amazon, and you can also have your books sold in bookstores, at libraries. It can be at libraries, Barnes and Noble, any major online bookstore, and in bookstores, your book can be sold there. And why I mention that and why that's important is because Amazon is a direct competitor of brick and mortar bookstores. So if you self-publish your book with Amazon, bookstores will not carry your book because they're a competitor. And Amazon does, own more than 50% of the book market, the bookmark market share, and like 80% of ebooks. So they're a huge competitor. So you want your book sold on Amazon. You need to have your book sold on Amazon, especially as a self-published author, but you don't want to just limit yourself to Amazon. And so this is why I recommend Ingram Spark, because bookstores recognize them as a very reputable self-publishing company. And so I have a couple local bookstores that have my poetry books in their store because I used Ingram Spark. So that's just an important side thing to say.
That's great. Thank you for that. What if someone has already self-published on Amazon? Could they go to with Ingram Sparks? Or is there like a process for that? Like,
I,
does
I, I,
everyone qualify?
I don't think you can. Once your book has an ISBN number and you self-publish it on a platform, you've
It's
chosen
done.
your place. But that's what's nice with Ingram Sparks is that your options are open because your book can be sold at Barnes and Noble. I even think like Walmart has my book. I don't know if anybody has bought my book from Walmart, but I have seen, like, I go online and I'm like, one of my poetry books is being sold at Walmart. So I'm just like, I'm telling you, it's like the sky's the limit with Ingram Spark because they have global distribution. And so that, and then, and also just too, like if you go to their homepage, they have videos, right on the homepage where you can click and they'll tell you, like, they'll help you learn about Ingram Sparks, and they help you learn about their self-publishing services and what they offer. So like right off the bat, you can start learning like what you can do. And then they'll have you, set up a username and all that once you get started. And then you can get into more resources. And that's where you would like upload your book and upload your books in cover design and all that. But what's nice is you can self-learn all of this by going to this website, ingramspark.com.
That's fabulous. Thank you for that resource. Any other ones that any other tips or like, oh my God, definitely keep this in mind as you're going through the process.
Yeah, and then another great resource for indie authors is called Reedsy. It's spelled Reedsy. And this is a writing and publishing resources for writers. They can find publishing professionals in book design, cover design, and interior design. They also have editing services and marketing services. And you can even get your book reviewed with them and get an editorial review for your book. And you know how traditionally books have like editorial reviews from like Kirkus Review, like that kind of thing. They offer a way for their book reviewers to review your book. So that way you have a professional review for it. And then they also can promote your book as well, so to their audience. So that's another thing that's nice about them. And then they also have like a YouTube channel, so you can learn. They have a lot of free resources where you can also learn their kind of take on the self-publishing industry. So those are the top two I would recommend is Ingram Spark and Reedsy. Reedsy is also, you can also self-publish your book through Reedsy because they also offer a platform for that too. But I would still recommend Ingram Spark over Reedsy for self-publishing. And then Reedsy is just great for those resources, like finding a cover designer to design your book, an editor, like those kind of resources. If you want marketing tips for marketing your book, that's another great place is Reedsy for that.
That's great. Any other ones that are coming to mind, or these are like the two main ones? These are great resources, Kassi. Thank you for that.
I think these are the top two for self-publishing, hands down.
Awesome.
And I would say, I'm going to see if there's anything else. Oh, I would also say too that there's a writing coach I follow and that I really like, her name is Ali Fallon, and I'll give more information about her when I'm done sharing about her. If you are interested in writing your story, doing more of like a memoir or sharing your story, that kind of a book genre, she has a course called, it's an online course called A Book in 6 Months. So it's a book in 6 months. So basically, she walks you through how to write your story through this 6 month process, and it's an online course. And then she also has a free, well, this would be a free resource because she has a podcast called Write Your Story. It's just called Write Your Story. And in these episodes, she basically helps you streamline the writing process by showing you how to order your story in a cohesive framework. Because she recommends you don't want to just go into writing your story freestyle. It's going to take way too long. She did that before when she worked on her first memoir. And so she's learned a way where you have a framework for how you order your book so that it just streamlines the whole process. So basically, her podcast is called Write Your Story, and the online course is A Book in 6 Months. And her name is Ali Fallon, ALLYFALLON. She's also on Instagram at Ali Fallon. And if you go to her Instagram, the link is in the bio. She's got a link in the bio that will take you to like her website and everything.
Wow, these are great resources. I'm taking notes of all of them for when the time comes. You never know when my
Yeah.
time will come to get my book out there. Let's take a quick pause before we wrap up here. Hi there, I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcast, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. You can also find other free goodies in the show notes. Go check them out. So these have been some great resources that you've given us, and just walking us through your whole process of what it was like for you, who you've become throughout the process too. And it's very inspiring. Like, it's getting me excited to be like, oh, let me go self-publish something, like, what do I want to put out there? From inception, like from the moment you had the idea and that you wanted to do your poems and turn them into a book and self-publish, like, how long of that process might have that been? Can you break it down for us? Like, from the idea, and then I started writing, and then I started doing this, because it seems like you did pretty fast. I mean, 2 books in less than 2 years.
Yeah, it was 2 books in less than 2 years. So I would say when I started writing my first poetry book, Growing Gills, it was the fall of 2021. And then I published it in March of 2000. No. Fall of 2022 is when I started. I published it in March of 2023. And then a month later, I started my second poetry book, worked on it for, 9, 10 months. And then I published it in spring of 2024 in like May. So that was in total, like both books, I probably worked on the writing process for like the writing, editing, putting the collection together for each, probably was like a 7 to 9 month process. And then the publishing was much more condensed into like 2 to 3 to 4 months. And then the marketing, you want to start marketing before it's published and then market after to keep, promoting it. So the timeline is much more condensed than if you were to go with a traditional publisher. So, and that's the thing that I'd also want to say with this is that if you go with a traditional publisher, it could take 3 to 5 years for your book to get published, because the whole process of querying your book, finding an agent, and then the agent has to sell your book to a publisher, and that can take, months to years for a publisher to want your book and do like a partnership with you, and then they work with their timeline of like when they will publish it. So that process can take 3 to 5 years. And I think what's nice about the self-publishing is that you can work based on your creative timeline. So it's like, once you're done with one book, you can start the next one. And that's the kind of the beauty of it, is that doesn't have to slow you down in the whole process. If that makes sense, it doesn't have to slow you down. So like, and that's the thing, is that one, idea that you have, you could be super excited about, and then you finish that, you want to get it out in the world. You don't want to wait, 3 to 5 years, because that you want to move on to the next thing. And then you don't want to have to backtrack and be like, oh yeah, that book I wrote, 5 years ago, now it's being published, and you're already on to like a whole new chapter in your life and a whole new book in your life. And so it's just nice that this can open up the doors in that way, where your creative work is following the actual seasons of your life.
Thanks for pointing that out. That makes sense, of just like, do you want things to come out a little bit faster, or are you willing to wait, like years where you might be a little bit more disconnected at that point with everything that you started with? Or other people might like it that, but these are important things to keep in consideration, of just
Yeah.
as you're putting it out there.
I have a friend who's working on writing, some fiction novels, and she's really set on it being with a traditional publisher. She's trying to have it published with like a big five traditional publisher. And, like, more power to her, because that's hard to do. And so she's going to wait, she's going to hold out for that. And I think that's great. If you want to do the traditional route, go for it. Like, I give you, like, that's awesome. And I would never want to hold you back from doing that. Or I wouldn't want anyone to feel held back from that, because that's an amazing feat in and of itself. And this is where I think you want to go back to the drawing board and figure out, what are your goals? Like, what does matter to you in the publishing, process? And that'll help you decide, like, whether to do traditional or self-publishing. And there's also hybrid options. I've heard now there are hybrid options that are like half self-publishing, half traditional, where you get the support of a traditional publisher, but you still get all the creative control in your project. So that's a part of it. And then I'd have to say, one of my favorite parts of self-publishing is the creative control. I know I just used that word again, but with a traditional publisher, they pick everything out for your book, whether for the book design, all the details. When you get to self-publish, I got to go in and pick the designer that I wanted to design my book cover. And, she also did the interior design. So the way that my book looks and feels, it just really flows well. It looks like artwork. So that each poem is an art, it's a form of art, but I feel like the way that my book designer pulled it all together, she just did a beautiful job. And there was a collaboration between the two of us when, bringing my collection of poems to life. So that was another fun part of it.
That's fantastic. As we're wrapping up, can you tell us a little bit about marketing? Like, what was that thought out beforehand? Was it an afterthought? And you're like, oh, now I have to market it. Or how did that show up for you in the process?
Yeah. So the marketing, that's like a whole course in and of itself, because marketing's so huge. But like, what I recommend is pick an author never really knows what is going to make traction. So, because there's so many marketing channels you have available for yourself. You've got social media, you've got Instagram, Facebook. You can buy ads that can show up on social media. You can collaborate and network with other authors. You can go on podcasts. There's like so many ways you can have you can go on blogs. Like, so that can get really overwhelming. So what I recommend for marketing channels is pick like your top 3 that you want to show up in and use. And I'd stick with those, while also being willing to try other things too, because it's sort of like I've been learning as I go in the marketing process, is what's working, what's not. But 3 things I highly recommend with marketing is every author needs to have their own website. So your author website, that's really your landing page to direct people to where your books will be. You could do your bio on there. And so that's a way that you centralize everything about you is on there. And then people can find other things that you're doing in the world too. And one of the main things I use is Instagram to share my poems and to connect with an audience. And I feel like that's been working pretty well, but it has its limits. And then they always say to have an email campaign. So to try and have like email subscribers. So when people go to your website, you can have a way for them to share their email with like a pop-up box that you can put in your website. And that way, like you can start sending newsletters out directly to readers and an audience that gets in their inbox. And then they can be updated on what you're up to, what's going on, when your book's coming out. A lot of people have Substack now where they write on Substack. And that's a way that people are really connecting with an audience, is writing there. And then an audience is already connecting with their words on Substack. And then that could turn into, hey, my book's coming out in, 3 months, 6 months, and so that's another place.
This has been fabulous, Kassi. Thank you so much. And where can people find you? We'll put definitely your books and the links for Amazon in the show notes, but how can people become part of your community and find you?
Yeah, I would say go to my author website. It's www.kassiwilson.com. It's KassiWilson.com. And that has like links to my 2 books, and then my Instagram's on there. So I recommend going there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And what's one thing that our audience can do to become more courageous and self-publish?
Yeah, I would start by just, going to Ingram Spark and checking out Readsy, those 2 resources that I shared with you. Start, watching the tutorial videos. And it's like the more you are exposed to the world of self-publishing, you're learning and you slowly become your own expert in the industry.
This has been great. Thank you so much for your time and for the resources too, and just explaining the whole process. So anyone that's been with us all the way to the end, go check out Kassi's books on Amazon, her poetry books, and reach out and connect with her on Instagram. Thank you,
Thank
Kassi.
you. Thank you.
Hi there. I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes, and all you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course.